Oh, fuck. I thought I had time to clean up the Rubik Marine Guard before the bar opened. Don't worry about it! So, my first armies in Warhammer were Space Marines and Orcs. This was due to my first box set being the Black Reach 5th edition box. However, over the years, I got into the Forces of Chaos, and eventually, these strange guys caught my eye. Rubric Marines, along with their character, Ahriman, the arch-sorcerer of the Thousand Suns. Their design, their story, the fact they were sorcerers, and I love sorcerers in general, yeah, I was hooked the second I saw them. And A Thousand Suns is still one of my favorite books in the Horus Heresy. The Thousand Suns wouldn't be a full army until March 2017, with the release of Gathering Storm Part 3, where the Rubric Marines and Ahriman get new models, and their Primarch, Magnus the Red, became one of the first Primarchs to be playable in 40K's tabletop game, along with his brother Robuk Guilliman. The full army line and codex would be ready to go for when 8th edition came around. Since then, the Thousand Suns have been my go-to army. Their playstyle is a more tricky and defensive style, which has always appealed to me. And again, their style and aesthetic are my favorite in all of 40K, which even extends their look and playstyle in Games Workshop's Horus Heresy game, where the Thousand Suns get the unique privilege of all their infantry units gaining psychic abilities, so long as you pay the points to upgrade the unit. So, why are the Thousand Suns my favorite legion and army? What makes them so special? Why should you care? And why does everyone say Magnus did nothing wrong? If Nibblehorns over here caused the event that made his dad unable to step in for the Horus Heresy? Well, allow me to give you the need-to-know details on the Thousand Suns, and share why I am both their #1 fan and #1 hater. The Thousand Suns story begins back on Terra. They were the 15th of the original 18 legions. However, during the development of their gene seed, Terra was stricken with terrible warp storms, and though the Emperor's laboratory was protected from the aggressive warp energies and madness that afflicted Terra, it clearly wasn't a good sign. Once the gene seed was ready, the Emperor and his scientists used the population of the Achaemenid Empire for its recruiting pool. The population was superstitious by nature and had rituals and beliefs that helped protect against mysterious forces that wished to cause harm. Among these first recruits would be Azek Ahriman and his twin brother, Ormuzd. The 15th Legion was something that the Emperor took personal interest in, focusing a lot of time on them, and even personally leading them numerous times, something that confused Imperial High Command, as the Emperor rarely led the legions personally. In fact, it was the Emperor himself who gave the 15th their name, the Thousand Suns. However, even with the honor of the Emperor leading them, tragedy would still fall on these Thousand Suns. The Thousand Suns genetic template appeared to be unstable. The Legion began to suffer from a condition called the Flesh Change, a series of genetic mutations that caused the bodies of the Legionnaires afflicted by it to grow and mutate, while also driving them insane. The Emperor, Malkador, and the Emperor's scientists tried to find the cause of it, even going back to the DNA structure of the 15th gene seed, but all attempts to cure the flaw were inconclusive at best, and utter failures at worst. Things only got worse when the Primarch of the 15th, Magnus the Red, was found on the nomadic sanctuary world of Prospero. If you watch my Horus Heresy video, you'll know the Primarchs are scattered across the galaxy by their mother. Magnus and the Emperor met and talked like old friends, even though the two never physically met before Magnus was found. Though the Emperor allowed Magnus to try and find a cure for the Flesh Change, and Magnus became desperate when the Emperor left to continue the Great Crusade, as the 15th was hit with a massive epidemic of the Flesh Change. In desperation, Magnus entered the Warp and met with a Warp entity. The entity claimed it could cure the Flesh Change, but at a cost, which Magnus paid the cost. And when he returned to the Legion, he was missing an eye, and the Flesh Change was halted, with the least afflicted of the Legion surviving, while the rest were put into stasis in hopes of being cured of their conditions in the future. When the situation was over, the 15th was down to only 1,000 members. Something that they should get used to. Once the 15th was up to combat effective numbers again, they and Magnus would rejoin the Great Crusade and were known for taking worlds through subterfuge, politics, and indirect warfare. The Legion made liberal use of psychic abilities, which was common even among the rank-and-file members of the Legion. Though, to be clear, not every member of the Thousand Sons was psychic. They were just more common in the recruits. Or sometimes, they developed the powers after Magnus's gene seed was implanted within the new recruits. Although, when the Crusade went out into the frontiers of the Milky Way galaxy, they found that the hostile forces that were also out there made casual use of Psykers, which made other legions become uneasy or outright hostile to the Thousand Sons. The Death Guard, Raven Guard, and the Space Wolves legions were the most hostile. The Death Guard were the most vocal of the Thousand Sons' critics, while the Raven Guard saw the liberal use of Psykers as a bad thing, and the Space Wolves pointed to the dangers and arrogance of the Thousand Sons using their powers willy-nilly. This all came to a head during an operation on the world of Shrike, where the Thousand Sons, Wordbearers, and Space Wolves were deployed together. During a large battle, a Thousand Sun Marine overused his powers in the middle of a firefight and had a massive psychic backlash, and was mutated by the flesh change, killing a squad of Space Wolves in the process. This almost caused Leman Russ and a horrified Magnus to come to blows, though the Wordbearer's Primarch Lorgar stepped in to defuse the situation. But this would become one of the many pieces of evidence used against the Thousand Sons during the Council of Nicaea. Now, the Council of Nicaea is a debacle in and of itself, and I should make a proper video for it some other time. But to make it quick, it was a massive debate on the ethics and use of Psykers in the Imperium. On the pro-Psyker side were the Thousand Sons, Blood Angels, Emperor's Children, and the White Scars, while the detractors were the Death Guard and the Space Wolves, though it was clear to many that it wasn't just a debate on Psykers, but also a trial for Magnus the Red and the Thousand Sons, as they had been accused of being corrupted witches and sorcerers. The debate ended horribly, with each legion having to disband their librarian units, returning them to regular Battle Brother status, and any Psykers that were not trained by the Imperium's personal schools, or weren't navigators or astropaths, were outlawed and either arrested or killed. As well, the Thousand Sons were found guilty of witchcraft, and were officially censored by the Emperor, which Magnus found hypocritical because the Emperor himself was a Psyker who was condemning Psykers. With this ruling, Magnus and the Thousand Sons quit the Crusade and went to lick their wounds on Prospero. And if you think things are bad now, you haven't seen a gambling addict double down, have you? While meditating on Prospero, Magnus saw a vision of the future. Horus would betray the Emperor and start the Horus Heresy. So Magnus used his psychic abilities to try and stop Horus from becoming corrupted by chaos. But it backfired, because, well, by defying the Emperor's orders, it only proved to Horus that the Emperor was incompetent, and that everything negative that Horus was thinking about the Emperor was correct. Magnus the Red was accidentally responsible for pushing Horus into the heresy. After failing, Magnus needed to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal. Now, my faithful viewer, what do you think Magnus did to try and warn the Emperor? Get on the first ship he could and head to Terra, meet with a friendly Primarch to send the message for him, put a message in a bottle and chuck it into space? Nope! Magnus would double, triple, and quadruple down, using his psychic abilities to send the message, which basically went like this. Father, please! There are already so many bodies in the hallways! Oh, nonsense, Ahriman! Now get me 100 more neophytes to sacrifice. We really gotta make sure this psychic message gets through. Magnus conducted a ritual to try and get a message to the Emperor. However, due to the Emperor working on a secret project and warding the Imperial Palace, Magnus again made a bad deal with the same warp entity he did before, and it helped him get to the Emperor, but it destroyed the Emperor's wards, sabotaged the Emperor's webway project by letting demons in, and damaged the Astronomicon beacon for good measure. These events meant the message was lost, and the Emperor ordered the Space Wolves to arrest Magnus and the Thousand Sons for their crimes. However, Horus, now being corrupted by the powers of chaos, changed the Space Wolves' orders from capture to kill, as Horus wanted to make sure no loose ends could interfere with his plans. This would lead to the burning of Prospero, a massacre that shattered the Thousand Sons. Their world burned, and the flesh change came back worse than ever. Magnus the Red made one last desperate deal with the warp entity, who revealed itself to be Tzeentch, chaos god of magic, infinite schemes, and change. Magnus, desperate to save his legion, signed all their souls over to the chaos god, and the Thousand Sons would be teleported into the Eye of Terror's planet of sorcerers. Here would be the stage for the last tragedy of the Thousand Sons. After the Horus Heresy, the Thousand Sons would be forced to help the traitors, even though the traitors lost the war. The Thousand Sons were once again suffering from the flesh change, leading to the first company captain Ahriman, along with a cabal of his most trusted supporters, conducting a ritual to try to cure it. And the ritual cure would work way too well, to everyone's horror. The Thousand Sons, who had decent psychic abilities, or were already powerful psychers, saw their abilities enhanced and improved, while those with little to no psychic abilities were turned to dust. Their souls were bound to said dust, and trapped in their now magically sealed suits of armor. Because of this event, Magnus exiled Ahriman for 10,000 years, but in the recent years of 40K, Magnus and Ahriman reconciled their differences, and the Thousand Sons came to haunt the galaxy worse than ever before. They nearly succeeded in infiltrating the Imperial Palace during Guilliman's Terran Crusade, were responsible for the Psychic Awakening event, and even more recently, Ahriman would help another Chaos Warband blow a hole in the webway over the Imperial world of Mordia. They were even the main antagonists of Space Marine 2, much to my confusion. But now that we're caught up on their story, let's talk about the Thousand Sons culture and organization. The Thousand Sons in modern 40K are all dedicated sorcerers of Tzeentch. Their entire command structure is based around sorcerers, with the most senior members being called Exalted Sorcerers. This makes sense, as the Legion follows Tzeentch, the god of magic and knowledge, so those with more psychic ability or better schemers rise up through the ranks more quickly than others. The Thousand Sons tend to launch operations that either get them more knowledge or psychic power, or that progress the plans of their patron deity. They puppet their Rubric Marine brethren to fight for them, or use demonic rituals to open up warp rifts to allow demons and mutants to drown their enemies in bodies or warp energy. However, should a Rubric Marine be destroyed in battle, it isn't the end for them. After or during a battle, the Thousand Sons sorcerers conduct rituals to capture the dust of the fallen rubrics, repairing the armor and rebinding its seals, so that the rubric is back in action before long. Though after long and drawn-out campaigns, when hundreds of Rubric Marines get destroyed, a larger ritual is conducted to teleport the dust back to the planet of sorcerers, to be painfully sorted later. This process makes the Thousand Sons not very keen on fighting in combat, preferring to work in the background of chaos invasions or other campaigns, and using cults or tricking other factions into fighting the forces they want distracted. In Space Marine 2, you see this with the Thousand Sons using the Tyranid invasion as a cover to infiltrate several planets to get their greater schemes going. Being servants of Tzeentch, however, the Thousand Sons are prone to backstabbing others or being flighty. The many schemes of Tzeentch can quickly remove powerful and veteran sorcerers from their positions by means of servants or Tzeentch's own trickery, or claiming to be helping their allies, only to either turn their guns on said allies or use them in a ritual to empower the Thousand Sons, leading to a lot of Chaos forces not trusting or relying on them, unless they can guarantee they have something the Thousand Sons want. The Thousand Sons have 9 major cults within it. 9 is the number of Tzeentch, so of course it would be 9 cults, though each cult is focused on learning more about the warp, magic, and specific things. The focuses of these cults are pretty self-explanatory based on their names. The cults are the Cult of Change, the Cult of Duplicity, the Cult of Knowledge, the Cult of Magic, the Cult of Manipulation, the Cult of Mutation, the Cult of Prophecy, the Cult of Schemes, and finally, the Cult of Time. Each of these cults is divided into 9 sects, each led by an exalted sorcerer or daemon prince. Each sect was further divided up into 9 thrall bands, led by regular sorcerers or aspiring sorcerers. Now, you're probably wondering, how do the Thousand Sons make more rubrics? As it's obvious that you can't recover every lost rubric all the time. The spell Ahriman Cast is a repeatable process, meaning that the Thousand Sons either capture or trick other Marines and use them to create more rubrics. We know for a fact that there were 9,000 Marines still alive after the Horus Heresy, with the majority of that number being turned into rubrics. But the Thousand Sons number much more than that now in just rubric Marines alone, because they just kept using others to grow their numbers. The Thousand Sons also tend to inscribe their weapons, armor, and vehicles with demonic runes, making their ranged firepower more devastating and their armor much tougher to break. This means that even the most standard rubric Marines bolters easily burn through Space Marine power armor, while being able to sometimes shrug off firepower that could destroy heavily armored tank units. Now, as I said, among the traitor legions, the Thousand Sons aren't trusted much, though they are still relied upon due to their knowledge and the sheer power they can bring into a campaign, with Thousand Son sorcerers being brought on as advisors or bodyguard units for secret chaos projects. Abaddon famously used Ahriman's Thousand Sons warband during the 13th Black Crusade to distract Imperial forces from one of Abaddon's actual targets. The last thing we will cover is the Thousand Sons rivalry with the Space Wolves and the Grey Knights. The Thousand Sons have had an understandable grudge against the Sons of Fenris, as they are hypocritical for calling the Thousand Sons witches and sorcerers, while they blatantly use psychic powers with their rune priests, but flavoring it as powers from a planet, even though it's blatant warp magic. As well, the Space Wolves were also mutants with their Wolfen curse. The burning of Prospero didn't help matters at all. It led to the Thousand Sons targeting the Space Wolves many times, and either horrifically damaging the 6th Legion, or getting utterly humiliated, which just fueled the need for revenge more. The feud with the Grey Knights, however, is a more recent development. As it turns out, the Grey Knight's first Supreme Grand Master was a loyalist from the Thousand Sons, who possessed a fragment of Magnus's soul. So not only is there a force of Space Marine Psychers sanctioned by the Emperor, who decried the Thousand Sons for using the same abilities as them, but they also had a former member of the Thousand Sons leading them when they started. This led to the Grey Knights and Thousand Sons engaging each other multiple times, with many cults of the Thousand Sons trying to figure out ways to get onto Titan, the Grey Knights' fortress world. The Thousand Sons in modern 40k are a legion driven by pretty justified reasons for revenge, ostracized by their allies, rejected by the very man that made them, and used as pawns in greater games none of them could comprehend. The Thousand Sons have become a vengeful pyre, wanting to avenge their fallen and burn down all those who scorned them, though as pawns of Tzeentch, the senior members of the Legion and even Magnus knew this was always going to be their fate. The Thousand Sons on the table are a tricky army to field. They, much like the Tau, rely on glass cannon hordes for their melee ability, as the Thousand Sons rubric units lack any melee ability outside their more elite and expensive Terminator units, though they make up for this weakness with powerful magic spells that either aid their units or hinder their enemies. The main strategy of the Thousand Sons is to park their tough rubric units on objectives, while their sorcerers hinder enemy counterattacks, and the more squishy melee units tie up enemy melee units, along with the new robotic units added to the army, which heavily added to the Thousand Sons' ability to hold the middle of the field. Though, always remember that trickery and keeping your opponent off balance is a huge part of the Thousand Suns strategy. The Thousand Suns are, as I said, my favorite faction in 40k, if playing them in 2 of my tournament videos wasn't enough proof of that. The Legion is a tragedy in 40k, and is a perfect example of how those who are arrogant are brought down, but also how the Imperium and even the Emperor are problematic, and how they treat clearly loyal forces and drive even the most loyal of their servants to betray them, with them also having an incredible design, both in 30k and 40k. God, I just love these models, and Ahriman is my favorite character in Warhammer, period. So, I got through 90% of the video before I realized, oh, I didn't record this last line, so oops. When we come back, we will be continuing Spooky Month. Not with Ahriman, but with someone else I brought up earlier. So don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell icon to be informed when I upload the next video, and join the Patreon to see my videos early and get access to my exclusive content over there. I would like it if we could get 15k subs here on YouTube, however, before the new year, because when we reach that goal, I'll review Fire Warrior and play it on stream. So join us next time as we cover 40k's Big Bad Abaddon the Despoiler.